watching at home. We have a special program this morning with several of our spiritual directors in the congregation. I want to just share two housekeeping tips. If you would benefit from a hearing aid, please help yourself on the table. And when we get to the question period, please use a microphone so that the people at home can hear your questions as well. And now, without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to the spiritual directing group and Elizabeth Jarrett Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Yeah, thank you. So thanks for being here. I imagine we'll have other people trickling in now that the service is over. I am really excited to welcome 4 friends of mine who are either in spiritual direction or spiritual directors or both. Briefly, I'm Elizabeth Jarrett Andrew. I trained in spiritual direction in my 20s. Mostly these days I do spiritual direction for writers. Carolyn Kolovitz is a guest with us today. She is a spiritual director at Loyola Spirituality Center in St. Paul. E.J. Kelly is a member of Plymouth. Sarah Lehman and Annette Atkins, all members of Plymouth who have some deep engagement with spiritual direction. So I'm really grateful for the 4 of them because they're here to share a really intimate part of their lives, and it's a part of our faith lives that we don't often get a glimpse into. So thank you all for being willing to share in that way. In troubling times, we really need the practices that keep us grounded, that root us in love, that connect us to our source. And spiritual direction is one of these practices. It doesn't get talked about very much, and I'm really excited to be able to introduce it here. It's ancient, it's deeply rooted in Christian tradition, but it's also really nimble and able to accommodate any faith, any spiritual path. Just by way of bringing us into this space and opening us to be able to receive the stories that we'll hear, I am going to ring the singing bowl and invite you to use the sound as a way to focus your attention, and as the sound recedes, it's a beautiful practice of quieting your inner life and kind of emptying your inner busyness. We all have a lot of turmoil inside us right now, and this is a practice that allows us to be fully present. So. Amen. When I was in my early 20s, I was full of inner conflict, and I had a really strong sense that I had come to a dead end in my spiritual life. I felt very empty. I felt really disconnected and really lonely, and I didn't have any sort of felt sense of God or spirituality. And I had this inkling that that deadness was connected to my my awareness of my sexual identity. But I didn't know what to do with that. And I was at a church retreat where Jim Dodge, who is a spiritual director who, he was a wonderful man. He did a lot of work doing spiritual direction with people on the streets. He was a United Methodist pastor. He was leading this retreat, and he said, here's what spiritual direction is. I'm going to sit in my cabin this afternoon, and if you want to come talk to me and get a taste of what spiritual direction is, you're welcome to come do that. So I did, and I said, here's what's going on for me. I feel like I've actually the metaphor that I used was that I had been walking a journey and then came to a cliff. And I had the sense that if I wanted to keep growing as a human being, I had to jump off the cliff, and I was not able to do that. And he's like, sounds like spiritual direction is the right thing for you. So he recommended some people, and I got a little taste of what it was like talking to him, and he recommended some people. And that started a really beautiful process of having a faithful elder listen to me and help me come to understand my sexual identity as intricately connected to my spiritual life. And in the process of coming out bisexual, the first person I came out to was my spiritual director, that also unlocked in me a vibrant and lifelong spiritual path. Because in hindsight, I wasn't being genuine with myself. I wasn't being open about my identity, and that element of the sacred which resides in the truth was inaccessible to me. So coming to terms with my own truth kind of unleashed this really vibrant and lifelong relationship with the mystery that I call God. So that's that experience of a safe space where I could be listened to with love has been really critical in my journey, and has become a practice that I have engaged in for now 34 years. It's an extraordinary adventure. It seems super subtle. It's very different from therapy, and hopefully we'll get into that as we share. But I am grateful beyond words for this practice because it's kept me steady on that path of transformation. And it's been so nourishing and so life-giving for me that that's part of the reason that I really wanted to be able to share it with you guys. So since everyone experiences spiritual direction differently, I really wanted a panel, and that's why we have a number of people here to share their experiences. So I thought we'd begin by having each of you share your story about what brought you to spiritual direction.
I came to spiritual direction due, I think, to multiple factors, but it was my work with contemplative outreach and doing centering prayer, taking part in the work of the Center for Action and Contemplation, Richard Rohr's group, and then knowing people who were doing it, which was easier, and Elizabeth was one of them, so kudos to you, Elizabeth, for doing this today, because just knowing friends who did it made it less scary. And you know how those of you that have had gym memberships, I don't know if you anticipated this being an analogy, and at one point in your life, you start with a certain set of purposes. I want to run a marathon, I want to get thinner, and then that changes as you get older. And you might say, I want to have my balance better as I get older. And for me, the reason of being in spiritual direction has evolved quite a bit. And you want your spiritual director to be able to respond to how you grow. And so presently, I really wrote down last summer what I'm trying to get out of it. And leading was, I'm entering my 60s. I'm the same age my father was when he died. And it's, what's my purpose? Who am I about? What am I going to be about in this next phase of my life? And some of you may have read Richard Rohr's book, Falling Upward. But it's that sort of question. And something I wanted to deal with is I found myself for the last year getting too attached to desired outcomes for certain things. And so I felt like I'd slipped backwards on that. And then finally, I have a process theological view where we are co-creating the world with God. And so to me that raises a big question about discerning and listening to understand where am I being called right now, and then more broadly in terms of a general direction or orientation. So that's where I am and what I'm getting out of spiritual direction today.
I'm not sure when I first heard about spiritual direction, but it was a process to get me to actually try it. So I kept thinking about it, and actually Paula Northwood got trained as a spiritual director, and so she was looking for someone to practice with, and so I would go in, and Paula would practice, and I would listen, and I was noticing that there were, that it felt like it was a connecting experience. And then I ended up being one of the lay leaders through the embroidery conflict here at Plymouth. And as we came out of that, I had a sense that as JT would say, spirit was working, that I had a sense that I was being invited into something after this experience, and I wasn't sure what it was. But I didn't think it was anything that needed to be fixed or corrected, but I was looking for someone to be with me as I explored these questions of where am I being called, what gifts am I noticing in myself? And so finally I was like, okay, I think maybe spiritual direction is what I should do. And I reached out to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth recommended a couple people, and I found the spiritual director that I still have. And I went in thinking, okay, I'm going to talk about Plymouth. And instead I talked about my mom. And we spent a whole hour talking about my mom and my relationship with my mom. And then my mom had a major life crisis 2 weeks later. And I was able to go and show up for her with so much love and compassion and presence that I don't think I would have been able to have had I not had that conversation with my spiritual director, who is Carolyn. I'll be transparent. And having someone walk with me as my mom then entered a long journey with dementia and eventually died a year ago, and walk with me as I've parented my kids through that. And it's been a gift, just such a gift to have someone present, companioning with me, inviting me to consider where God is in my life and in this moment, and helping me get in touch with that sense of spirit that's present in myself.
I wanted to go last because I feel like an outlier in the spiritual direction world in that I'm not at all sure about God. I don't know where God is, and I've been in spiritual direction for many years, and we never talk about God. It's not part of our language, and my director does a good job of adapting to kind of spiritual inklings of each of us. So she doesn't make me pray. Instead, what I'm interested in is a more Quaker version of the Spirit, as in the inner light. So that's what I'm seeking. Though I got to spiritual direction in a kind of billiard ball way. I didn't go directly, but I heard that there's this woman who did Jungian sand play, which I'm really interested in and had never seen anybody who did it. I'd been in therapy a lot, but I wanted through sand play. Do you know what it is? You pick out, it's like conscious dreaming. I mean, you pick figures and arrange them in a sand tray and then tell their story. And it is awake dreaming. It gives you access to other layers that are often very interesting and very profound. So I went to her wanting to deepen what I had been doing in therapy. It feels to me like therapy sometimes goes like this, and what I want to do in spiritual direction was do that. The other thing that consoled me was because I'd been in therapy off and on for a long time and was feeling, what's wrong with me that I'm in therapy all my life? This woman said, the nice thing about spiritual direction is that many people do it for their whole lives. So you don't have to feel like you're damaged in order to do it. You feel like you're enriching yourself if you do it. So I have found it very extraordinarily enriching, and it is the safest place where I find myself. And that's what I most care about.
Well, I can share the story of how I came to be a spiritual director, and also what brought me to spiritual direction. So it really began with a neighbor of mine who was, our kids were in Brownies together, and this neighbor was dying. She had terminal cancer, and through a series of odd synchronous events, I came to be the one that was videotaping her, telling her life stories for her children. And so I did that over a series of time. I recorded her telling various stories. And then when she was near the end and in hospice at home, she wanted me to bring over the video and to watch it with me. And that turned into this all-day affair of her listening to the stories that she was telling from her, now she's listening from her hospice bed, and very frequently asking me to pause, and then she would begin to tell me her hopes and dreams for her children, her regrets. It was a very powerful afternoon and conversation. And the interesting thing about this day is that, to be honest, and it's a very important part of the story, she and I never got along. Our kids were always fighting with each other, and it led to conflict between us, we'll say, in terms of how to handle that. We had two very different personalities. I tend to value humor very much in terms of my world perspective, and she was a self-proclaimed very serious person, and so we had some conflicts that way. And as I was sitting there listening to her, my heart just completely broke open in this way where I would have given anything to enable her to live. And I would have done anything to help be a part of her children, especially her youngest ones, really knowing who she was. And I realized that I was glimpsing God in this moment, and that to hear another person's story, to see another person's heart, is to see God. And the fact that we were not each other's favorite person made that all the more universal of a realization that to see and hear any human, their heart is to see God. And so as a seeker of God, coming away from that experience, I wanted more of that. I wanted to see God more. I wanted to hear more people's stories and see more people's hearts. and be a part of them seeing God inside of themselves and my learning and growing from seeing God in them. So it was weeks, barely, after that experience that I did some Googling and then found myself in the spiritual direction training program at St. Kate's.
I would like to hear each of you briefly share what you understand spiritual direction to be or how you understand it to work.
I've been thinking about this about this quite a bit. What's the difference between therapy and coaching and spiritual direction? And what I've come to as a sort of working definition is that therapy is about the past, coaching is about the future, and spiritual direction is about the present. So what I think of as spiritual direction is being fully in the moment and being fully in yourself, in your circumstances, and seeing what that means and making sense and meaning out of that.
The word that comes to mind for me is companionship. And that's how I've experienced it, as being in this moment with this other person who is fully present for me and inviting me to be fully present to myself. And then walking with me as I resist that. I resist being in my body, resist being with my feelings, resist being in the moment, and gently being with me in that resistance and in that embrace, and kind of in all the different iterations of that.
I don't have a broad definition, but I view spiritual directors, and mine in particular, as meeting me where I am and what I need, and responding to where I am in that moment and where I am trying to go. And an example of that would be last summer I was very angry and very despairing, and I called it lament, and had been back reading a little bit of Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations, which is very short, so you can read it a couple times, even in one sitting. And I started, and she knew how angry I was about what's going on right now and my passion for justice. And she said, if you were to write a lamentation today, how would it start? And I started, like the big Jeremiah sort of pronouncement. And she said, why don't you take that as your homework assignment and write a lamentation? And it was a wonderful assignment, because I'm putting my just anger that's all over onto paper, and I'm trying to pinpoint what I'm feeling. I'm trying to pinpoint what I feel about others, and that took some work. And then it really got into, what am I asking of God? Which gets into what is how do I view God? And I do use the term spirit, and I view God, but what am I asking of God right now? And what do I think God is even capable of doing? Because that's how the Lamentations end. You're really asking God to do the typical Hebrew Testament. You're asking something of God, and so I talked about what I want God for the people in my community, and then for myself, and that's how I ended that. And that was super healing for me. It did not completely take care of my anger, but at least it wasn't controlling me as much as it had been, or my lamentum and despair.
So, spiritual direction, I see spiritual direction as a spiritual practice, just like prayer, keeping the Sabbath, studying sacred scripture, going for nature walks, just like any spiritual practice. it is designed to create this rhythm in your life of bringing your attention to your own soul, bringing your own attention to spirit or God, or however we think of that. And we all know how life is. We get distracted. And so to have this built-in practice of bringing our attention to what matters most to me, how is God, how is Spirit present in me, how is Spirit present all around us. And so that practice, do you want me to say? Okay. So the practice is, or maybe I'll be, to in training to be a spiritual director, first and foremost, we are trained to take ourselves out of it. So this is really about the person who's coming to you and Spirit and God. And so we're taking ourselves out of it. We're there to, as the person talks and tell their story, we're there to serve as a sort of mirror to reflect back to them their own story, their own experience. We ask questions that are meant to take the person inside of themselves more, what is present in their heart, what is present in their body, in their gut, what am I being called to now, how am I being nudged in any particular way. And then we are we're illuminating those threads, those themes that are in the overarching narrative of that person's life, is how I think about it. So most of us, whether we're aware of it or not, are telling ourselves a story about our lives as we live, as we go through it. And the same themes tend to come up over and over and over again. Sort of the symbol of that in the spiritual journey is the spiral. So we keep visiting the same themes over and over and over again, with the hope that each time we're going a little deeper. We're getting a little closer to the core of why that is a theme in my life and how it is leading me to God. And so illuminating those themes that we see through the questions that we ask, through what we reflect back to the person, are just a part of companioning somebody as they're on that spiral.
Would you say a little something about the history of spiritual direction and, the tradition, the connection to the tradition?
Why, sure. So spiritual direction exists in some form in all faith traditions, and Spiritual Directors International is a website you can go to, and it's kind of a overarching, they set the, what do you call that, your basic, yes, the professional standards of the work. And but in terms of, from a Christian perspective, spiritual direction began with the earliest Christians in the first centuries, and what we refer to now as the Desert Fathers and Mothers. So those who followed Jesus by doing like he did and going into the desert to pray and essentially living as hermits. And so people in nearby villages would recognize that these people were centering themselves, right, in their faith, and and would seek out those people for spiritual guidance. So would go to them when they had a issue or a question or a problem, or questions about their faith and that sort of thing. And these desert mothers and fathers would guide those people into their own souls and into their own connection with spirit. And then, so that continued, and those desert mothers and fathers, I mean, you could see an evolution into the monastic movement, and monks and nuns. If you come to like the Middle Ages, for example, and some of the great Christian mystics like Teresa of Avila or Julian of Norwich were nuns and were spiritual directors. So people would come to them for the same reasons that people came to those desert mothers and fathers.
Thank you. As you all are talking, the metaphor that comes to me about what spiritual direction is I think in my experience, one of the best questions for discernment of where spirit is moving in my life is what's coming alive in me. And I think about that life force as like an inner pilot light, and my spiritual director is the one who helps me tend that pilot light. There's no one else in my life who has that particular role and that special job. And it's not so that monthly space is a space of listening. It's a space of attention and intention, and in many ways, the spiritual director holds that for me. Yep. No. Go ahead.
The term spiritual direction is something that trips up a lot of people, because, like, if I say I'm a spiritual director, then that sounds like I'm directing you, and that frankly puts a lot of people off of the whole concept. And so even Spiritual Directors International has moved into other language. But where that comes from, spiritual director, is the idea that spirit is nudging each of us, all of us, into our authenticity, into union with God. We are continually getting nudges from spirit. And so a spiritual director is trained to help people see the direction that spirit is nudging them. So it's not that I am directing anybody, and in fact, if I was, I would be a terrible spiritual director. But what I'm doing is creating a space so that the person can recognize, can see how spirit is directing them.
Thank you. Super important. Yeah. Would each of you share a little bit about the role spiritual direction plays in your ordinary life? So this is an ongoing practice. It becomes kind of an ordinary practice. What difference does it make that you show up at your spiritual director's office once a month?
I take this one first. So building off of what Elizabeth and Carolyn were talking about, that pilot light, I have numerous experiences of coming into space and being asked that question of what's alive for you today, and finding out that it's something I had no consciousness that was important to me. Like, I think I'm coming in because this is what's been on my mind, and instead, all of a sudden, I'm finding myself welling up with tears, or my heart is racing, and there's some other thing, some other question, some other relationship, some other dynamic that I haven't been tending to, that is finally given the space to emerge. And then that companionship of someone walking with me as I explore what I'm meant to pay attention to right now. Just like I said, I came in for one thing and it led me in a complete spirit. And I really believe that was a moment of spirit as I define like this universal love and care being tending to me in that moment, guiding me to that, what I needed to pay attention to so I could show up for my mom. Like there have been, in the however many years I've been doing this, so many moments where I've felt that.
Similarly, I often, when I go, think, oh, I didn't even know that that's what I was upset about. That I think I'm talking about this, and then it sort of swings around here, it comes into focus, and then becomes a place where I can just, as my spiritual director says, just sit with it. What is that? And who is that? And how do we make friends with that? And how do we get along with that? I also wanted to take this in a slightly different direction and just say, we pay for this service. I mean, the people, spiritual directors are doing a service that we pay for. And I think that that's a really important part of the practice. Not because money is an important part of the practice, but for me, it frees me from worrying about the other person. That what happens to me often in friendships is I think, if you listen to me, I have to listen to you, which is a wonderful thing about friendship. And sometimes I worry about taking up too much space, too much energy. And so in this place, that's part of how I get to feel safe, is that I can take up all of the space, and that the role of the spiritual director is to make as much space as I need in that moment. And that's consoling to those of us who feel like we take up too much space. It's really helpful. So I'm happy to pay for that to help make that work better.
I have had a lot of varied spiritual practices and ways of looking at the world. And not that long ago, I talked to Joe, my spiritual director, and said, I feel like it's just a hodgepodge, and maybe I need some sort of container for how I go about this. And so we talked about the concept of a rule of life, and I don't like the word rule, which a lot of spiritual communities use, like that. We think of the Benedictines and welcoming the stranger. That's one of their rules. And she said, well, others talk about rhythm of living or way of being. And so I've been kind of working on my own rhythm of living, and that involves practices, how I approach learning and art, and also kind of justice work and work of compassion in the world, questions I ask, and how I go about doing that in a very spiritual way. And one of the practices I engage in is I say this maybe with a French, examen or examine, which is an Ignatian process where you kind of look back over your day and see how did I show up in certain places and certain events. And maybe I was irritated about something and what was really going on, or I felt too pulled by my emotions this way, or I look at how I have been doing this rhythm of living over the week and what was hard for me. And I journal around that. And I also journal around moments of wonder, connection, and awe. It's just what has struck me. And those things serve as what I bring back into spiritual direction the next time, is what's been nagging me, or why did this happen? If I'm still kind of working through something and I haven't quite gotten it, that's what I bring to spiritual direction. And so it's really, Joe responds to kind of what I bring into it on a given day. And it's really what's been happening in my life in the last month, good and sad and awesome.
Well, I can share that spiritual directors are one of our ethical standards is that we're required to have our own spiritual director, plus we are in supervision, and so that means that We regularly meet with a group of other spiritual directors to just share if during one of our sessions something was like poking at me or bringing up some memory of my own or something like that. And the idea is that that supervision practice is helping me more and more and more remove myself from sessions in this ongoing way. But in terms of how spiritual, my spiritual director is important to me, how I think about it is, those, I don't know what they're called, and this actually just came to me while I was driving in the car here, but those toys where they kind of look like they're painted to look like a person, they're wooden or plastic, but they're round on the bottom. And anybody know what I'm talking about? Maybe something like that, but I'm thinking of like this bigger one. Anyways, so what I was thinking of is how, in my life on a day-to-day basis, sometimes I can notice myself kind of veering off this way, different ways, particularly now with everything that's going on, of just getting off balance and feeling myself doing that. And I feel like my spiritual director helps me rebalance myself.
That's a perfect segue into my next question. Lots of times in progressive churches, activism and working for social justice is the emphasis, and the whole contemplative side is either assumed or ignored. And so I'm curious to have you reflect, especially in this time of social turmoil, rampant injustice, rampant harm to our neighbors, just a lot of upheaval. Why is this an important practice to you? What does this do in terms of your capacity to be present to the circumstances and be generous and be in service?
I'll tell a story from my last story of spiritual direction, which happened about 2 weeks ago. It was on the day that Renee Good was killed. And I serve as a legal observer, and so I was out along with Dawn, and I just had known someone was shot, but I knew no more. And I was at a couple locations, and at one of those locations, it's over here on Lake Nicollet, ICE was particularly violent, and I have it on, and I was there close filming, and I shared it with Katie Dillon, who most of you know at church, and she called it brutal. That's just brutal. And then we were done with everything and just almost shaking from all that, and then heard that the person who had been shot had died, and we learned her name, and learned a little bit more about that, and I hit spiritual direction at 4 o'clock that day.
Hit is right, isn't it?
Yeah, and Joe showed up just wonderfully, and we went through some body somatic exercises to just settle, and what I had been journaling on was set aside, and we worked through a number of things, and towards the end, I said, how am I to get up tomorrow morning? And she knew what I meant by that, because I often tell her that one of my practices in the morning is to ask myself very early on, what am I being called to do? How am I being called to show up today? So it wasn't how do I literally get out of bed, but it's like, what do I, and she said, EJ, the gospel you were following today is the same gospel that will be there tomorrow and next week. And keep discerning and do as you have been doing. And then she said, sometimes you're called to Sabbath. and that's okay too.
I went through a kind of fallow period here at Plymouth. There some time where I felt like I wasn't getting my spiritual needs met, that the call for social justice was so loud that I couldn't hear what the Spirit was doing. And some of that I resented because I thought, I've spent 35 years in the classroom teaching about social justice. So what I don't need from the pulpit is a call or scolding to go out and do more social justice. So I would come to church and I would feel thwarted and contained by that call. And so what I got out of spiritual direction was an ability to stay at Plymouth Church, to stay participating here. I'll also say, in deference to other deacons here, that came at the time when I was also a deacon, and Plymouth was going through pretty hard times that the deacons were dealing with. So I felt pretty hungry and pretty empty, and what I needed was an ability to fill myself up so that I could do social justice work, not just be called to do social justice work. So that's what I continue to do with spiritual direction, is to make sure that I am whole enough, that I have energy and, actually I want to say kind of the right motives. I would like to act out of love rather than out of anger. And that is so hard right now, because there is so much to be angry about, but it feels like anger is not the path to getting where I want myself to go, where I want my community to go. But how do we live out love? And the only way I know to do that, or the first step of that, is to make sure that I can find the capacity to love myself, so that my anger is so blah blah blah. You sort of get the gist of it anyway. But so that's what it does for me now.
When I saw this question from Elizabeth a couple days ago, I was like, oh. It felt like a really heavy question. And then a couple things came to mind. So the first is that invitation to notice where God or Spirit is present in the world, even in the midst of things that are awful. And the language I've been working with recently from the CAC conference this fall is making the shape of love real in the world. And so trying to be aware of where I saw the shape of love being made real in the world right now, in the midst of all this violence and harm. And then the second was a conversation that I'd had in the last 2 sessions around energy, and noticing, and this was really around energy around my work. And I had come in with this metaphor that I'd been working with squirrel energy for the last many years, of chasing one acorn after another. And I noticed that I defaulted to that when things became really intense. I've been a squirrel for the last 2 weeks. And so I thought about all the gifts that had given me, even in the last 2 weeks, of getting oriented and knowing where I could plug in. And then I reminded myself that my intention is to show up in a different way. And so what would it look like to be present, tending to making love real in the world with this different energy that maybe is more sustainable, and that will allow me to stay engaged and present longer. And so again, it was that opportunity to notice, oh, this is this invitation in my life to think about things a little bit differently. And it's a big shift from a squirrel to an elephant. And so I'm being very gracious with myself as I try to make that shift. But again, it was, I didn't even quite know that I needed to be aware of this.
You did, yeah. Well, I'm aware we're getting toward the end. I would like to be able to take a few questions. Do we need to end at 10 of or 5 of? 5 of. Excellent. Okay, excellent. Let me just, first of all, make sure that you know of a few resources. People have referred to the CAC, or the Center for Action and Contemplation. It's a really beautiful resource for ongoing education in contemplative practice. I have a handout over there that you're welcome to if you're interested in, there's a couple definitions of spiritual direction there and local resources for finding a director. Again, Carolyn is at Loyola Center for Spirituality, and so you can find her information at Loyola's website, which is on there. And there's also many other directors there and at these other organizations. And then Annette has trained as a spiritual director, and yeah.
Yeah, I'm currently in training at United Theological Seminary to do spiritual direction. And because I'm in training, I'm not charging any money yet. And so if anybody's interested in just trying this out, in fact, I need people who would work with me a few times to build up my hours. And I'm also in supervision. So if anybody would like to try it, I do it without pay for now, and my email address is at the bottom of that list of resources.
Yeah. So it's a great opportunity to just get a taste of it, which is what all I needed to enter the practice. And then generally, I always recommend interviewing 2 or 3 people before you settle on someone, because it's hard to find a good fit. So yeah, I'd be happy to take questions for anyone.
I've been taking copious notes, trying to understand what one receives when you do spiritual direction. And I'm really intrigued with, what do you do with that? And I know, EJ, you've begun to talk in a way that I can understand. What about that? You leave, you're not going to come back for a month. What are you doing with it?
Maybe I would like to answer that. You know, spiritual direction is essentially a practice of listening. And it's listening to your heart, listening to what's coming alive in you, listening to your life experiences. And so it's, in many ways, it's a practice of being as opposed to doing. that it allows you, it invites you into that presence. And yes, there's, when I leave spiritual direction, I go do my ordinary life. I teach. I'm doing what I'm always doing, but hopefully I'm doing it with more presence and more capacity to listen. So I don't know if that is answering your question. It's anything around the spiritual life is like looking out the corner of your eye. It's very, very hard to identify. It's hard to quantify. But yeah, anyone else want to reflect on that?
Yeah, I was going to say that for me, it's a practice of paying attention to my habitual habits and patterns. So sometimes things will come up and I'm like, oh yeah, it's okay, Sarah. You're doing that again, right? This thing that I just find that I'm doing that came out in spiritual direction, maybe it's a reaction that I'm having to something in the world or in my family or in my history. And so it helps me remember that I can do it differently, or I can be aware of it, and when I'm aware of it, then I have choicefulness.
I see it, my spiritual director is often asking questions rather than providing answers. And just like having listened to a sermon that really makes you think and you maybe wrestle with for a week or two, that sometimes happens out of spiritual direction. There's an insight that I really need to stay with and work on. So it's not just, here's your homework per se. Like even the lament I worked on was a lot of inner work and thinking, and as opposed to just something you go and put a pen to paper and you're done. So a lot of what you're dealing with is just like a great sermon or a great lecture or book. It's staying with you and helping you grow.
And I would say that for me, it does the same thing that prayer does. And that I do think of that hour that I spend with the spiritual director as a spiritual practice, and it's a practice like prayer, and in fact, it may be the only version of prayer that I can do.
You know, I want to add to that. I'm on my third spiritual director, and each of those three I've seen 10 years, a little over 10 years. And what working with someone over that kind of time does is provide a sense of continuity of life. That, you know, I get caught up in details, and to be able to have someone mirror back to me the thread of continuity that holds my being together, my work, my faith, that's a huge gift. I think we have time for, do we not have time for one more question? Oh, okay. I would like to end with a quick prayer, if I might. This is a prayer from Thomas Merton, and it's one of my favorites. And I think it somehow is representative of our work here. Oh God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you, and I hope I have that desire in all that I'm doing. I hope I will never do anything apart from that desire, and I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may not know anything about it. Therefore, I trust you always, though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death. I will fear not, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. And I think spiritual direction is a way of manifesting that in our daily lives. So thank you for learning about this. We can stick around if you have questions, and help yourself to a handout.
Thank you very much. Please come back next week. We have a wonderful program in connection with the Gallery Committee about creative caring for an aging person. This artist has spent years drawing portraits of her mother, and that time that they spend together in that creative process has been a joy and a blessing for both of them. So it's a very interesting story, and I hope that you'll come back and also see the exhibit in the gallery. Thank you.